Well, it's not every day I get a chance to pull out my Terran Empire Monster Maroons. Or I guess Terran Empire Fascist Chic is not really maroon. Hello, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. I am here to review the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery's 5th season, this time the midway episode for season 5, this one, episode 5, titled Mirrors. Now, as per usual, I will stay spoiler-free up front, but get into spoilers in the back half in just a moment. But I just have to say it up front. Yes, I do own this Terran Empire costume. I generally have a rule not to buy cosplays of fascist characters and such. I actually bought this one online because I thought I was buying a Monster Maroon for a nerd wedding that I was going to, and then I got it, and it turns out it was the Terran Empire one. Don't know why. So this is the only Terran Empire thing I own, so I guess I'll take a chance to pull it out when I can. Anyway, it doesn't even really fit. It like keeps falling over, which I guess I'm fine with because you know it's evil, and I'm not cool with that. Anyways, generally, let's talk about this episode, and we'll get into spoilers in just a moment. I enjoyed this one quite a bit, and it's really making me recognize why I really love this structure for this season of Discovery over the structure for the rest of the series so far. The rest of the series in Star Trek Discovery so far has generally had like one overall plot line and then maybe even a mystery box going on where they were finding clues along the way, but it was kind of more nebulous in terms of like what they were trying to do and their goals. Like, for example, last episode they were trying to stop the DMC, and so they were trying to figure out different ways to like figure out what was going on with it, different clues with that, which was generally a good enough sort of like instigator for the season, but it kind of made it nebulous what the different stops were along the way. Whereas this episode, as well as all the episodes we've seen so far, have made it very clear that like this is again a treasure hunt going after the progenitor technology, and each stop is kind of its own little moral lesson from these scientists years ago, and it kind of creates this very week-to-week Star Trek-y the original series feel of like, oh, we're gonna go to a new planet, discover a new thing every week, and yet it kind of gives it a larger thread that goes through. And because of that, I just really like this more episodic structure that still fits within a larger narrative that other seasons of Discovery really didn't have. We've gotten in little bits and spurts, like with I think like the first half of season 3 of Discovery had a little bit of that as they were trying to find the Federation and such, but this episode I think really nails it. It's kind of why I'm really angry that this is the final season of Discovery, because it's like, man, they finally figured out the formula. They finally cracked it. I'm really enjoying this structure, and yet, alas, this is the last season. It's just, we get there right in the end. Regardless, though, moving even beyond that structure, and again, this fits within that sort of episodic one, I'm loving the ongoing character arcs that we're getting here. Raynor in specific, I'll talk more in spoilers about him, but gosh, I just love, he's slowly become my favorite character despite him being introduced in this last season. I adore Raynor so much and just how they are handling his character so far, but they're also weaving in little character beats throughout this sort of thing that I really am enjoying. But this episode mainly centers upon Book and Burnham's relationship as well as Maul and Locke. And I'll talk more spoilers in a second, but Maul and Locke's backstory gets a big play here, and I found that I really liked it. There's some really cool nuance in their backstory. However, it feels a little bit limited, both in locations and in terms of what we get to see with their backstory, just the little snippets that we get from them, and also, the overall structure, it feels a little bit like I've seen it before. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's just there's so much nuance packed into this backstory that we get between these two, like little bits and pieces of, their cultures that they're from that I don't want to spoil, but it's just like, oh man, I would have liked maybe a little bit more just to kind of glean into what that means and what they're trying to get at here. And while I can see how it connects to the larger narratives of the season, there's just, that feels such a rich idea that we got more of. And certainly I'm glad for me wanting more, and maybe we'll get more throughout the season, but it does feel like this episode is trying to like speed run through this backstory and not really give us as much time as it could have been. And again, that's not necessarily a fault of the show. They only have 10 episodes. They're trying to do a lot, but it is a criticism criticism that I have to present, regardless of whether or not it is, something that the show could have been able to do or not. It's just, it is what it is. But I do really enjoy it. The other thing, too, that I wish to say about this episode, without spoiling too much, is there is a big, very cool setting that this episode takes place on that initially I did not feel that the show took full advantage of, but having now watched it and sat with it for a little bit, I actually really enjoy how they used this particular setting for this episode, because it doesn't feel like it was overly relying on nostalgia or overly relying on like pulling from other elements of Star Trek, but using this element from Star Trek Past to be able to tell a more thematically intriguing story with our characters and storyline right now, and use this idea to draw out the concept rather than being like, oh look, we're doing this thing from Star Trek Past, isn't that interesting? I liked that they used it to buttress up and give depth to their story rather than using it to give like an interest to the story just by basing it off of like Star Trek canon of the past. So really did enjoy the usage of that. And finally, I will say David Ajala gives a great performance in this episode, again with some really wonderful nuance, but I will have to talk about all of that in spoilers. So if you have not seen the episode yet, you can jump off here. Let's get into it. So now that we're in spoilers, I just want to kind of reiterate this point that I just said a little bit ago. I really did adore that this episode took place on the ISS Enterprise. Initially, my excitement, but then also when I was watching, maybe even a little bit of trepidation that I thought we were going to get with this was, oh, again, kind of like 2 episodes ago with the time bug thing, that this was going to be used as a chance to be a nostalgia play. Like, oh, look, we can bring in fascist Captain Pike or, fascist Spock or whatever, because we're on the ISS Enterprise, which you know from the original series has had, Kirk and Spock and all of them on there, and they can not only use the Strange New World set, but even maybe use the Strange New World actors. But again, the show did not do that. They didn't have a Captain Pike cameo or anyone else cameo on this episode that they could have had. They very clearly used the Strange New World sets for this, a redressed version of the set, to make it look Terran Empire, but they didn't have the cameos. And initially there's a part of me, again, just the Trekkie nerd in me, is like, oh man, that would have been cool to see that cool crossover there. But in actuality, I liked that it deepened the themes, actually, in 2 different ways. This first way is that it ties it into, again, Discovery's history. For better or worse, whether people like it or not, the Mirror Universe has been a strong thread throughout Star Trek Discovery since its inception. Obviously, it was there in the first season with Lorca and the trip to the Mirror Universe. Then we had Empress Georgiou throughout all the way through season 3, and had elements of it there. So there's always just been that thread of the Terran Empire and the Mirror Universe throughout Discovery, and it coming back here feels like a nice echo to its past in what it is its final season. Again, I'm really loving these like small callbacks to past Discovery in not overt ways, but in subtle ways that feel like the show almost kind of knew that it might have been the final season, even though they didn't know it while they were actually filming it. So I did enjoy that, but even more importantly, the episode was really talking about, as the title suggests, mirrors, and how people are mirror images of each other in different ways, and how we turn out really comes down to, the systems and worlds and the people that we find connection with. And again, deepening this season's theme of connection to others and how we see others. And so, we have Book and Burnham as a very clear mirror to Maul and Locke in this episode, where, Book had a chance to learn to grow and from a mentor in a way that Maul did not, and as a result changed his outcome, especially through his connection with Burnham. And Maul and Locke only have each other, and yet didn't have these mentors and people who enabled them to be their best selves outside of these systems that try to tell them who they're supposed to be. And again, this kind of goes to what the whole idea of the Terran Empire was in season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, right? And the Terran Empire generally, but especially into season 1 of Discovery, was talking about how fascism tries to press us into molds, tell us how to be, trying to deny our true emotions, and make us these people for the machine. And so to sort of place this episode talking about that on a Mirror Universe ship, without directly tying it back into that, but sort of like recognizing those themes and using it as a thematic background for this episode, I thought was really a beautiful concept, and I really adore that, and especially just using it as a thematic backplay and not a nostalgia play for Star Trek. Like, yes, we're on the ISS Enterprise, but you have to use the Strange World sets. Isn't it cool we're on the Enterprise? But it not being the overt focus. I thought that was really brilliant. So I've already ranted a whole bunch throughout this whole review about the episode, so I'll try and go a little bit faster through some of the specifics. of the episode, but let's just sort of get through it. We start out the episode right where we left off last episode, where we learned that Maul and Locke have gone into this like wormhole that they couldn't see until we like did some techno-babbly type of stuff, and Burnham decides to go into the wormhole to go after them into this sort of like pocket dimension that's there. And she chooses to go with Book. And we have Rayner pulling her off to the side and kind of doing a Riker in saying, look, the captain shouldn't go down there. That's dangerous. And I was sitting here being like, yes, why is Burnham the one always going down to these planets? And I get it. It's the lead character syndrome. So he does have a very clear point there. But Burnham actually brings up her own points about how it is tactical. Book is the best connection. She has a connection to Book. She should be able to go on this mission. And what it leads to is what Rayner's actually trying to express, which is the fact that he worries that he's not going to be able to lead this crew. And I loved this because what we've gotten from Rayner so far this season is he's been an asshole and then he learns to be less of an asshole at the end of the episode. And while I've loved that structure for him so far, it is one that could get easily repetitive and just constantly emphasizing these points like, oh, Rayner's a dick sometimes, but he can grow. But this episode actually changes the dynamic and actually has it be about Rayner expressing a vulnerability and a fear that he has. And first expressing it to Burnham, who he has grown in the past 2 episodes to have a level of trust for. And then her reiterating her trust in him and him recognizing throughout the episode that he can do it. And by doing so, by trusting others and not trying to like dictate how to run things, which again goes back to this mirror theme of the episode. So just to kind of run through Rayner's storyline here after this point, you know, we see him taking charge of the ship. Him and he was like, the captain's depending on us, and he feels this weight on his shoulders after, you know, they lose contact with Burnham. And I love, you know, him going to, you know, Stamets and Adira and being like, we need a solution. We need to get it now. Tell me now. Let's make it clear. Let's make it fast. Let's go. And then him realizing like, no, this is not how best to enable this crew. And Stamets not being judgmental about that, but actually sort of parroting Rayner's own words back at him and saying like, you're not in this alone. And you can trust us to be able to work together. You don't need to sort of hold this burden on yourself of like, I need to save the captain. I owe her this. It's a burden that you can share and trust the crew to get. And I just adore that. And we see him at the end of the episode, I just beautifully come to recognize that and be like, all right, let me open it up to the crew in a way that I wouldn't have just a few episodes ago where we saw like, shutting down the crew is like, I need it my way goes. Now he's like opening it up and he thinks even then he like sort of has this, I forget what he said, the food that he offers. Also the boiling cake line, hilarious. Love that. I want to try boiled cake now. Actually, maybe I don't. But regardless, he opens it up and everyone in the crew just sort of strings along and they bounce off of each other to come up with an idea that actually works to save the captain. And I really just, I love just that moment where like the crew saying this one person says this thing, this one person, and they all just come together. And it again, it just shows not why Discovery's crew works, why this sort of military structure that Rayner kind of works under and that many people criticize Discovery for, you know, sometimes can work in certain situations, but in this one, it's not enabling them to be their best selves, and how Rayner needs to understand that like he doesn't have to shoulder the weight. It's not all on him. It doesn't have to be this hierarchy and sense of responsibility and taking it all on. And also you can work to enable people to be their best selves, not forcing them to be these people for this system to work for you. I loved that. And I also loved that his ability to understand Burnham came out of her connection to him, with her learning from his culture like he learned from hers, and her being able to send that message with the numbers with the tractor beam on the ISS Enterprise later in the episode, and him recognizing what it was again a really, really beautiful idea. We also get a quick little moment in all of this where Adira says that they're upset about and feel guilty for bringing the time bug onto the ship. I'm curious to see if that's going to come up in later episodes, because it was an interesting moment. I think it works well for Adira's character, but it was only a brief snippet, so I hope that gets pulled upon later on. So let's now jump over to the ISS Enterprise and the rest of our storyline here. I adore these moments on the bridge with Book and Burnham, where Burnham notes that like her counterpart probably was dead by the time the ISS Enterprise had disappeared, and this led me to like wonder so many things, because we know the ISS Enterprise was in the Mirror Universe up through the original series, because we had the episode Mirror Mirror where they were crossed over, so it had to take place after our universe Kirk told Mirror Universe Spock to, you know, try and take up the charge and change the Mirror Universe.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
Captain Kirk, I shall consider it.
If you read the books, novels that these were based on, we know that Spock went on to try and lead the Mirror Universe, try to make reforms, and then that eventually falling into the Klingon-Cardassian alliance that we get to see in Deep Space Nine. I think it's referenced in Deep Space Nine that Spock sort of tried to do reforms as well.
While your Kirk was on this side, he met a Vulcan named Spock and somehow had a profound influence on him. Afterwards, Spock rose to commander-in-chief of the Empire by preaching reforms, disarmament, peace. It was quite a remarkable turnabout for his people. Unfortunately for them, when Spock had completed all his reforms, his empire was no longer in any position to defend itself against us.
And so there's that moment where Burnham at the top of here says, oh, I'm sure Spock was just as ruthless as all the rest. And we actually know that that's not true. If you're a Trekkie, you know that Spock actually tried to do reforms. And he was a fascist at certain points, but he did try to take to heart Kirk's lessons, even just as we hear from little snippets in Deep Space Nine, which goes to this larger idea that we see in this episode where, we go down to the transporter room where the clue was supposedly found, and we see that this was actually a refugee ship, that people must have stolen the ISS Enterprise, gotten away with it, and Saru from the Mirror Universe actually tried to save them, and that they were people living within an oppressive system who were trying to find a way to escape it, and actually found their way to our universe and did actually escape and found hope and were able to be their best selves despite the systems that they grew up within, which I thought was a beautiful idea to talk about, like how Burnham kind of instantly judged Spock, and while she doesn't learn the Mirror Universe Spock, I should say, while she doesn't learn the truth of who Mirror Universe Spock was, she does get confronted in this way, not directly but subtly, how not all Terrans were evil fascists, that there were good people in that universe despite it being kind of a cartoonily fascist universe, and it's something that she obviously kind of knew, but it's something that she sort of just assumed by her statement around Spock in this episode, and we know that that's not the case. And so I found that to be a really beautiful idea, and going into the conversation with Mal and Locke, having that set up, because that's kind of what we're trying to do with Mal and Locke here. They're not just evil people, they are not just bad people, but they're people trying to do their best, and trying to just find their way out of an oppressive system, as we later learn through their backstory. So I just thought that was a really beautiful way to set this up. We go then and we have Burnham and Book confront Mal and Locke, and we have this wonderful battle between the hologram stuff. I thought that was very clever, but it leading to a larger conversation where Book tries to talk to Mal and connect with her, but hers being like, I hated my father, and Book thinking, oh, this way I was going to be able to connect with her isn't actually going to be an easy way to connect with her. I have to go deeper than that because her dad didn't really support her in the way that he supported Book. And I was really worried as we were getting into this sort of leg of the story that what the story was going to try to do was try and have Book try to get Mal to forgive her father. I think there's a complicated conversation to be had around parents who, fail their kids in some way and understanding that they're human beings and coming to forgiveness. But I think that also has to come coupled with that person seeking that forgiveness, which, Mal's father never actually did. And so I was worried that, Booker was trying to get to that. But actually, there was a more nuanced point that he tried to make with her, which was, look, he failed you. But he also was important to me, and we had different experiences of this man that, he meant a lot to me. He taught me to be my best person, the person I was. You didn't have that, and you were trying your best. And what I am trying to tell you is, despite how we were treated differently by this man, that makes us family, and I do care about you because of that connection that we have. I care about you for who you are, and I want to get to know you. And so I thought that that distinction about how Booker was trying to make this connection to Mal in this sort of longer way to make her understand that he sees her, at least is trying to see her, I should say. He doesn't really know her just yet. I thought was a really good nuanced point. And it gets to the backstory we see with Mal and Locke, which again I loved because we learn that Locke is actually a Breen, which is a race that we've been hearing about this whole season, but a race that first appeared in Deep Space Nine on screen. They were referenced before then, and we never got to see their face. And in the books, if you've ever read the books, the way they describe the Breen, actually, we learn in the books that the Breen were actually to many different races, and they were just sort of a conglomerate that used a mask to hide that they were a conglomerate. This is very different than that. What we learn in actual canon now, I guess, is that the Breen they hide their face, but they actually have two different faces underneath their helmet. One, the translucent one, one more solid one, and Breen society only values the translucent one. They say that this other face is not your real face. It makes you weak by solidifying yourself or whatever. And the fact that they hide their faces, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like the Mandalorian, but in a very different way. It's not about expressing individuality for the Mandalorian, making everyone the same. It's about trying to like ubiquitize everybody. And again, this society of like, your strike might makes right. And this is where I was a little bit disappointed in this backstory, because like that's such a nuanced idea. And I love this concept of Locke coming from this oppressive society that's like, you can't get to show the entirety of who you are, and Maul being this person who values the totality of who he is and every side of him, and the side that he has to deny by his society. But unfortunately, that's a great concept, and I love the idea, and I love how it sort of gets brought up here, and I hope we get more of it. But in terms of what we're shown, it's kind of very quick. And it's just like the show trying to get very quickly to the point with it, rather than expressing a ton of like how Locke isn't able to kind of show his entire self, and what showing that side of him really means to him. We get a little bit of it because we see him growing in his relationship with Maul, which again, I love the sort of like romance that they start to form, but it's again, very, very quick. And I wish we'd just gotten a little bit more of it. Maybe we will get more of it, but for here, it's like these are the bare essentials for that. And it kind of is a great world building for the Breen, and I love just that adding to canon that Discovery is doing with these characters. It's a very cool concept in numerous ways, but it just feels like, oh, they're trying to hit the bare essentials with it and get through it, rather than like a deep exploration of it. And it's sad because these actors are really killing it. And part of the reason I think it's a little bit rushed is, again, it all takes place in like this one set. And I get they're trying to save, money and stuff, but it's like, them just constantly meeting this cargo bay and just like hiding kind of very publicly. And again, it feels like they shot this on the volume, and it kind of it's why I kind of hate the volume, because the volume has these cavernous spaces, and so they kind of just set up these like boxes that they're within, and maybe a little cloaking field that they have as well. And I'm like, what a dangerous way to do that. If anyone walks over there or sees something, like, it's just very open, and I would have much rather like a more enclosed, smaller set that maybe they were hiding in a room or a back room of the thing. It just, I don't know, the use of the volume for these cavernous sets. I get that she's like a trader. I get she's meeting him there when she like is able to come in as a courier. So they would be meeting in like a cargo bay area, but it just felt like weirdly dumb, and it kind of the staging of it just felt a little bit weird to me on there. So that was one element that I didn't really love. And again, I loved the relationship building here. I love seeing that Locke, he is trying to stop this this blood debt that the Breen have against him because he shot his own mentor. And again, this goes to speaking to that mirror theme of, Locke is kind of similar to Book and Maul in that he has a mentor who he has mixed feelings about, doesn't want to kill, but obviously does not treat him well. And it kind of going to all of those ideas. Even Burnham herself had Lorca in a similar way too, which is kind of evoked by the ISS Enterprise setting. So all of these people are just people who have gotten a chance to grow beyond who they were told to be, and Maul and Locke haven't really gotten that, but they see that in each other, and that's why they are so dedicated to each other. So all of that, I think, is very well evoked by this episode, and I will give them credit for like doing so much with so little time, and doing it really well in a thematic and beautiful way. But it also feels like there's so much more here. There's so much more meat here I want to dive into. So hopefully we get it as the season goes on. Ultimately, we get this stuff at the end of the episode where they manage to escape. We already kind of talked about it from Raynor's side. It feels very like technobabbly. I'll use the tractor beam, get out. Maul and Locke are able to escape. I did want to point out one other thing: the stuff with the clue. And so we get this water vial, and Burnham also tries to trick Maul and Locke by like putting in the pendant that she has, like a piece of her own stuff, so they can scan it to make it seem like, oh, it's from their universe. I thought that was clever, but it was all fairly, I don't know, the episode didn't really pay a ton of attention to it. It was kind of like just offhanded lines and feeler moments that just made me confused. Like, I've watched this episode twice now, and the part where like they get that vial of water at the end, that being the next clue, I'm like, wait, where exactly did they get that? Where did that come from? How did she get her hands on that? Like, I know she got it from Locke and everyone at certain points, and I get like the trick she was trying to do with the pendant, but it's kind of so offhanded and not super like made important as much by the camera and by the storytelling. It just kind of got lost in the end. So I'm like, oh, I guess they got the clue, and it's this vial of water or whatever. So yeah, I'm curious to see where they're gonna go with that. But I will say it kind of got a little bit lost in the shuffle. But honestly, it's just the MacGuffin. So I'm fine. If anything was going to get lost in the shuffle, how they got the MacGuffin, I'm okay with that being less specific because the themes, ideas, and character development in this episode were really great. Overall, that is my thoughts for this episode of Star Trek Discovery. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, though. Did you like this episode of Discovery? I'd love to hear everything there. Were you disappointed we didn't just get to see Captain Pike or somebody in their best fascist black chic, I guess? I'd love to hear all that below. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and as always, my friends, live long and prosper.